Like to call to order a meeting of the Board of Selectmen and Licensing Commissioners for Wednesday, February 10th, 2016. We will begin with a Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda this evening is approval of minutes from our January 25th meeting.
Madam Chair, motion to approve minutes from our prior meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Communications and announcements, Mr. Town Manager.
As you're aware, through this communication job and vacancy log and just the communications through email, we're going through a period of retirement and or departure, something that for the first couple of years I was here that we didn't see a lot of that, but folks are moving on. Again, the vast majority of those through retirement, so we'll have various processes to fill those slots. Some will be internal, some will be outside searches, and we're working to update job descriptions, especially for the building inspector role. We updated the job description, met with members of the Board of Health before publishing the health director position. The primary change to the health director position is they will be the internal or the staff lead on issues associated with opiate addiction. So we've modified the job description so that we have that point person to take on and coordinate activities, work with the task force and the other players to have a presence with that. And so we've begun that process in terms of getting out there in the marketplace and starting to get responses. We'll be doing the same with the building inspector, if we haven't already in the last day or so, to start to receive candidates and responses back for that position as well. We're reviewing some internal options associated with the Rich Betcher position. Haven't made a final decision yet, but we're reviewing some options internally associated with that. So we're making some changes, and we'll hire quality folks and keep everything moving forward.
How's the market condition for those types of positions? Because it does involve, I mean, we certainly want people with, we don't want to be training them. You know?
Well, I think in both the building inspector and health director, using those specifically, it's a little bit, you're not quite sure when you add to the market, right? Most of those folks come from similar positions in other communities, right, and either are looking for a change, not unlike the people who, Sue Sawyer, who left, she went to Tewksbury. It was a lateral transfer. That's not uncommon. So I would expect that either we'll get some folks with some specific experience looking for a lateral transfer, or some folks who maybe work for smaller communities where the opportunity to work for North Andover would be an advancement. So the market is... we usually judge the market based on the responses rather than assuming in advance what it's like.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know until we enter the marketplace.
Okay, fair enough.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the business?
In Bocher, he was the communications officer? Is that his role?
Rich Betcher, he was responsible for both overseeing the communications officer above the position of the lead dispatcher, as well as doing the budget and purchasing for the department. So he handled the financial aspects of the department. So there are really two pieces to that position. I'm cautious to call it a unique role, but certainly it was a role that grew organically from when Rich started in the role as a dispatcher and moved his way up. Mm-hmm. And his skill set molded what we crafted the job description like, rather than crafting the job description, and we really used the existing skill set. So we think there's some opportunity to possibly do the same, but we're reviewing those possibilities. Because again, it's not a common position or something you'd find in every community.
But that couldn't fit under purchasing with the purchasing director from the town, or just within purchasing? Is it that unique that...
No, the purchasing is just a small component of it. Really, the purchasing is a component, not unlike there are folks in almost every department. The DPW has staff that have an understanding of purchasing to work within the construct. Really, our chief procurement officer, who's the assistant town manager, his role is to make sure, so that last set of eyes, to make sure we're complying with the statute. So we have individuals who have been trained within the state process to receive some training on purchasing, and there's actually several of those: DPW, facilities, police, and so it's more at a cursory level. I would say of the two, the more important part is someone on the budgeting side, having someone who understands the public safety budget, so that the command staff there spends less time on the budget and purchasing and more time on the public safety. But I'm going to have conversations with the command staff at the PD and get their opinion and response back before deciding how to proceed.
Good. I see we filled the tree climber. so we're
We have.
going to drop off the
Wow,
list.
that's been a while.
That has been a long
That's-
time.
Yes.
So I was having trouble reading the town planner section.
Yeah, so,
You want a real packet?
No, it's a few sentences long.
so we have tried and not succeeded, I won't say failed, and tried and not succeeded, tried and not succeeded, and tried and not succeeded. And so even with some salary change, have found, not unlike the way I've described what's happening with the health position and the building position, sometimes you just don't know what's happening from a market perspective. The way we've decided to proceed, and it's ingrained into this budget product, is, you recall we moved Gene Enright from a position, general position within planning, to the Assistant Director of Planning and Community Economic Development and Community Development. After sort of evaluating what's happening in the planning environment, decided the best way to proceed would be to hire a staff planner, a much easier position to hire, lower level position, between sort of an administrative support, someone with education, but someone who hasn't yet had the experience on the planning level. And have Gene continue or spend continued focus on the planning side, moving away from the community and economic development. So Gene has been working with the planning board for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. They're comfortable with her. So leave her in that role, but bring on staff support on a staff planner role. If you look at the way we're structured in the health department, in conservation, am I missing one? I'm missing one. But health department and conservation, they all run 2 professional staff members and an administrative assistant in both of those roles. In planning, we didn't run that way. We ran with a planner and an administrative assistant. I would argue that planning, in addition to the economic development side, is essential to what we do, but we were emphasizing the planning piece less. So we needed to find a way to balance that, to make that department look like the other departments. Also within the budget is a request for funding for $100,000 to begin the master planning process. And that master planning process is going to consume a significant amount of a person's time. And so we're restructuring the department so that there'll be 2 people in planner, a director of planning and a staff planner. Sort of what I would refer to as Andover light. So somewhat like Andover, but at a notch down in terms of structure.
Okay.
And then we're keeping the administrative assistant there as well.
So the first name didn't work out, is at least what you listed in here, or both
There's
have worked
been
out?
several different names. Which name are you referring to there?
Well, it says at one point we hired a Rebecca Oldham. And
Rebecca
another
Oldham
point-
is hired as the staff planner.
And then we hired Peter Kane then as well.
No, Peter, you got to go, you got to read backwards. Yeah, sorry. Peter Kane was hired.
Okay, that's what I was
except
thinking, but then I'm like,
Sorry.
it just didn't
Peter Kane was
jive from the third to last sentence to the second to last sentence, so.
Peter Kane was hired. It was our last of 3 efforts to hire a planner. We had a planner who worked here for a couple of months and went into the private sector. Another planner who worked a short time and moved on. Peter Kane was then hired, agreed and accepted the position, and then in turn his current employer upped the ante, both from a title and monetary perspective, and he rescinded his acceptance of the position, even though he was due to begin on February 1st. We went back to the folks who had shown an interest and spent some time with Rebecca, not seeing her in the town planner role, quite frankly, but seeing her in a staff planner role, someone who can grow into the role. She does have a master's in public administration. She's a strong candidate, but she needs experience in the specific planning role, and that's part of what motivated us to do a restructuring. So we have 2 people in planning, one of which will spend time and shepherd through the master planning process, and one will continue to focus on supporting the planning board. So the decision really was, after being almost a year now in the market without being able to fill a role on a permanent basis, taking a different perspective. Yep. From a monetary perspective, it's net neutral. It's probably a few dollars to the savings, and it'll allow us to move forward on the planning side and focus on the master plan.
Excellent.
Madam Chair, we have 2 things on the public call.
Yes.
One is we have a young lady celebrating her 39th birthday tomorrow, Rosemary.
39th again and again. Yeah.
Yeah, and the second thing is I attended the school committee meeting last week because it was much warmer then, but
Nice.
And the school board want me to pass on to the board how much help Andover's been with their process. And
I think we have some representatives from our
Yes.
school
Oh,
department here this evening.
don't stand here.
No, it's staff
Little
planner.
board behind. I mean, no offense, Steve, no offense,
The
Steve.
real people behind.
Good representation.
The real people.
I have something if you're ready.
Please feel free.
I'm just reminding the public especially the seniors, that the state has a circuit breaker law, and I know that we have some people that who live in condos that are feeling a little bit of that rapid rise in their property values. You know, they were depressed for quite some time. Now, the good news is their properties are worth more. The bad news is when your properties are worth more, your taxes go up. But so there is a senior circuit breaker law. I spent some time at the assessor's office and the senior center. People should really look into this. You can get $1,000 back when you file your income tax, even if you do not pay taxes. You still can get a check back, and it's tied into your property taxes, your water and sewer.
Water
But
bill, yeah.
it's a little bit complicated, but it's a really great opportunity, so that if you're 65 and older, also too, and I'm a supporter of this program, but if you're really feeling the pinch, and I believe it's also 65, it might be 60, you can be relieved from the CPA. You need to go to the assessor's office. There are some income qualifications, but I've helped more people. I often carry these around this time of year in my car, and I've given these to people, and they're absolutely shocked. They'll call me back in a few months and say, I just got a check for $1,000. You have to do it every year, but for those seniors who are feeling a little bit of the pinch with their being on fixed incomes, with, again, the good news and bad news. The good news is some of your condos have really recovered from the market, but with that, unfortunately, comes higher taxes. So I hope you'll look into it. There's packages at the assessor's office and at the senior center, and if you have a hard time, you can call, really, town hall, any of us. And it's also on the website, but I hope people do look into it. Tell your accountants. They don't all know. They don't follow it, believe it or not.
Renters, too? That applies to renters?
Thank you. Yep, it applies to renters as well. So
there are resources available. You said it was complicated, so there's resources
it's a little
available
complicated.
for people to,
yeah, there's a
help them through it.
formula, but the numbers are really fairly generous. That if you're by yourself, if you have an income of $57,000 or less, married, joint filing, it's $85,000. You know, head of household, $71,000. But your property, this is really, again, pretty generous. Your assessed value cannot exceed $693,000.
Wow, that is very generous.
So, again, I have some here. If anybody, children, do it for your parents. It's worth it. So even if you're not paying income taxes, you still can get a check, believe it or not. But,
That's great.
so that's my comment.
It was over 1,000 last year.
It is over 1,000, a little over 1,000, up to. It's like 1,017 or something like that, a little bit over, yeah.
Great.
Any
Good-
other
good information.
communications or announcements this evening? No. Moving on. Consent items. First one is a request from Angel Flight, New England, to use the streets in North Andover for the 2016 Ride for Angels on Sunday, September 11th, from 7 a.m. to 2:30. This is an annual, I believe.
I wrote that. I would say yes.
Did you? Yeah. Nice, nice.
Yes, it is an A.
I do believe it's an annual. I see no conditions. Everything's been reviewed.
Fantastic organization. I move approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's great.
It is great. They do great work, and it's kind of a sleeper organization.
It really is.
Boy, if your family needs it, it's fantastic.
Moving on to appointments.
So we last week had the opportunity to sit down with two individuals who are interested in joining the Poet Laureate Committee. Actually, the Poet Laureate Committee is specifically for the selection process of the Poet Laureate. And so we have two very different individuals. Helena Minton, who's a former library director. I'm either confusing either Reading or North Reading. While the second person is a gentleman named Mark Borer, who is actually an engineer, but I don't know if amateur poet is the correct word.
That's
but,
what I was just going to say.
but somebody who has a real passion for Essex County-based poetry. So both really interesting individuals, both would definitely bring passion and I think give a lot of thought and consideration to who our next Poet Laureate is. So I would motion actually that we appoint both in a single motion, both Mark Borer and Helena Minton to the Poet Laureate Committee. Actually, could I do this because they're different term lengths, or? So in the case of Helena Minton, I motion that she be appointed through June 30th, 2016 to fill an unexpired term. And my motion for Mark Burrer is to be appointed through June 30th, 2018.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you for your service to
Great.
our community.
It's great for the kids. They really involve the kids in this program, too.
They do, it's fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad we do it. Our presidential primary warrant, exciting! So we need to approve and sign it.
People still have an hour to go register to vote if they want to. It is
Oh,
7
yes,
o'clock. If you want to
yes.
go and change your registration or register at all, go run over and see Joyce Bradshaw.
Be part of the
I like
funny
to
game.
stay unenrolled, so,
I
decide
hope you're already a
that
registered
day.
voter, though, right?
Of course, am I registered? I like the unenrolled, decide on that day what I'm going to pull. Do we have it? You want to sign it now? All right. Actually, I need approval for it
Madam
first.
Chair, move that the Board of Selectmen approve and sign the presidential primary warrant as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That primary is on March 1st, correct?
Oh, yes, thank
Super
you.
Tuesday, I
Super,
believe.
are we Super Tuesday, the first day of March?
I think so.
7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the high school.
Will there be school that day? I probably assume.
Is there
but-
school March 1st?
There is for the presidential primary, there is not for the presidential election.
Wise,
We've worked very collaboratively with Joyce Bradshaw on that.
I bet.
Cool.
Okay.
Can people still register to vote online? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, they are. But can they, yeah,
Yeah,
that
but-
was stopped as well.
Yeah, I wonder if you're able to do it real time, register to vote. I mean, either way, if you're watching at home, I know people rush to run and watch our meetings in person, but instead of that, go rush and see Joyce at Osgood Landing, right?
$1,600 Osgood, yeah. Don't go to the wrong place. The fence is in the way.
Yeah, you won't get in. Excuse me.
Okay. It's not a really stupid question, but
Um,
here for the Conservation Committee, is this like the right meeting?
No.
No.
But we're much more fun than they are.
I know.
They're at the Senior Center on Main Street.
This is the Board of Selectmen.
They changed the location.
Oh, they did.
The weather has just wreaked havoc on everything.
They said 566 Main, all right, Senior Center.
120 real.
Behind the old town hall. Well, what will be town hall again in a few months, but
Okay. So,
Good luck.
all right.
Are you in the parking lot?
What's that?
Are you in this parking lot?
Yeah.
So head out of the parking lot, take a right, keep on going, till you pass a church.
Yep.
It's about 200 yards up a driveway on your right after that
And
church.
what's the address?
120 Rare Main Street. The parking lot's behind the buildings.
what used to be the fire station, it's behind the
Behind the
All right,
fire.
good times.
Have fun.
Good times. Yeah. Okay. Do I have a motion to move into licensing?
Motion to move into licensing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are now in licensing. Would you like the gavel?
No, I don't think I'll
Oh.
need it tonight. Okay, the first request on our license commissioners is a request from Jorge, and I want to butcher your last name, but De Almeida, of 161 Mass Ave, North Andover. The property location is 161 Mass Ave. Certificate of liability insurance and vehicle certificate of registration are complete and on file in the town clerk's office, included our favorable recommendations from the police department, fire, and building inspector, and you are looking for a livery license. And I think all the paperwork is in order. We have the binder for the insurance, and both police and fire were favorable.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good luck. Do you want to say anything about your business before you move on?
Well, first of all, thank you for everybody for this opportunity to start my own business. And I'm very happy to live in the town. I have 3 kids going to school here, and we feel comfortable in the town. And after I lost my job, I started doing this. So now I see a opportunity to
Oh, great. Well, good
start
luck with
on my
that.
feet, on my own feet.
Are you doing Uber as well?
I'm doing, yeah.
Okay. Well, good luck.
Thank you very much.
You're-
Want to say how people can get in touch with you? Give them, this is your opportunity to sell it a little bit because people might be watching at home.
Well, my first priority get the things work properly with all the licenses, I still work in the last part of our to get license, so
But he's working already, so he can always give his phone number. Is that okay? 781-307-8513.
Great, great.
And you can also get them on the Uber app, right?
yes.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Well, good luck, and thank you for coming in. You're welcome to stay, but you're also free to go if you'd like. We're going to be covering the budget tonight, so.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next on the licensing commissioners is a request from Merrimack College for a one-day wine and malt liquor license for 4 events. All of these are performances of the on stages at Merrimack for February 20th, March 4th, April 1st, and April 2nd, all 5 to 11.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I'll hear a motion to move out of licensing.
Motion to move out of licensing?
All in favor?
Aye.
We are out of licensing, and back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. No old business, new business will be the town manager's FY17 recommended budget.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We will try to keep this as brief as possible and certainly offer the opportunity for any questions that you may have. The little-known secret, probably for the public, but not for this board, is that the budget process is far less about numbers. I think what we've learned in the last couple of years, it's more about relationships and meeting expectations. And certainly we've been fortunate that with the leadership of the Board of Selectmen and the school committee and the relationships we have with the school department, we've been fortunate to be able to meet those expectations and really put aside what has historically been the kinds of differences that impeded a budget process from making forward progress. We've had great successes over the last 4 years, and those are really largely attributable not to some magic formula. Stan likes to refer to the bag of money, but no magic formula as to how to allocate the available resources or the budgetary dollars, but really is about getting people in a room or more informally developing the kinds of relationships that we can share our thoughts and dreams for the community and make those thoughts and dreams become a reality. And we'll talk a little bit tonight about the continued progress in that direction. We feel very, very comfortable and satisfied that we've taken the right steps over the last couple of years, not gotten impatient about what we see as a marginally improved economy, but embrace that as a way to move everybody forward and do things for all departments, for all segments of the population here in North Andover. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But again, we're fortunate in that we're able to have these kinds of conversations as a result of good relationships and good planning, when many towns often, quite frankly, spend the next couple of months fighting about these things. We're finding ways to partner together to make sure that we do things right. So I want to recognize not only the leadership of the Board of Selectmen, who have been fantastic in suggesting and giving me ideas and giving me general guidance and always reminding me of where the potholes are, not literally, probably more figuratively. They've been great. Both, and I appreciate that. And certainly the school committee has worked with the Board of Selectmen and I to continue moving things forward. It's a much appreciated relationship. Anytime you have a major player change, in our case a new superintendent, but certainly could be a town manager or a school committee change, you do spend those few moments wondering how that's going to go. I can tell you that Jen has hit the ground literally running. Jen is a high-energy, passionate person who has embraced the North Andover way, and I mean that in a very, very positive aspect. I enjoy our meetings. I enjoy the relationship we've developed. She keeps me moving forward. I need less coffee now that Jen's around, I think, which is a positive. But I certainly appreciate that. I think for those of you, I think Phil and I, who spent some time sitting through Jen's budget presentation, it was impressive. Impressive not just because Jen has a great communication style, but really impressive because it was thoughtful and deep, and given the amount of time that Jen had been here, it really could have been, budget light, but it represented a real understanding of the community and investment and understanding what the people in North Andover want. We're both amazed now that we get, Jen gets communication from residents who may not be school folks about the things that they think are positive. I get communication now from school folks telling us how they think things are moving forward. It's not something, I certainly will speak for myself, that I'm used to, but it's really something that we should pride ourselves in. People communicate with us because they're happy the way the entire community is moving forward, and we should embrace that and accept it and enjoy it, because quite frankly, I can give you many examples of how that's not common. We get regular calls these days from other towns. We get emails from other towns asking us about certain aspects of certain projects we're doing. There's no greater flattery than having another town ask how you're doing something or how I'm doing.
Especially, and we've had...
Many towns.
All different towns, but we've had a few from them as well.
So it doesn't mean that the rest of the process of allocating $92,083,000 is easy, but certainly as a forward-stepping, moving process, the allocation itself is far less complicated when we're dealing with that kind of consensus. So it should be noted for the public that the school committee has adopted what I would refer as the consensus budget, a 3.7% increase in the school department, representing approximately $1.6 million in additional spending. And it's a positive step. So when you receive this budget, it already comes embedded within it is the consensus budget of the school department. The budget itself, again, is $92,083,000. It represents a $3.6 million increase year over year. From a revenue perspective, it's broken down in large categories. There's approximately a $2.3 million increase in property taxes. That's fairly standard under Prop 2.5 for us to increase that revenue stream by approximately $2.3 million. No surprises in there, no additions of revenue beyond that that's allowed under Prop 2.5. Of the balance of the $1.3 million, we received a fairly large increase in state aid. As you may recall, the town bridged the gap into full-day free kindergarten, something that I think has been a great asset to the community, something that has made us a better community and will help us educate our kids moving forward in a more effective way. And that gap required us to extend some of our reserve dollars on a one-time basis to bridge the method of financing from the Commonwealth. So between the state aid increase of 2016 that came as a function of the governor's budget and the additional headcount now attributable to the full-day free kindergarten, state aid went up a little under about $1 million. So that was really a catch-up, wasn't a net new $1 million. So that makes up another portion of the $3.6 million. And then smaller increases in other categories. Excise tax is a significant part of our revenues, our receipts for local receipts. It is a trailing indicator for us. If we see regular increase in motor vehicle excise, it tells us a little bit about the economy. People are turning their cars over more often. They're buying more expensive vehicles. At $3.7 million, it's a significant part of our local, what we call local receipts. For the first time in a number of years, with the assistance of the Revenue Fixed Cost Review Committee, we're agreeing to move that number up to $4 million. It's a reflection of what's really been happening over the past several years. We're seeing an increase in our local receipts, our permit fees in building and plumbing and electrical, not as a function of a rate change. We have not recommended a rate change on building, on electrical and plumbing for many, many years, but it's a function of, again, the economy ticking up slightly, seeing more building permits, more expansions, and as a function of that, we're seeing more of that category of local receipts, and that's incorporated into this additional revenue as well, approximately $100,000 in additional revenue associated with those kinds of fees. We have had some one-time fees, things like the Riding Academy and some of the work at Merrimack College, but we don't incorporate one-time increases in fees as part of a permanent change to the budget, just to take a more conservative approach. And there's also an $80,000 increase in the revenues as a function of the voted change in ambulance fees that happened when this board changed those rates several months ago. So in total, those are the sort of big ticket items that constitute a $3.6 million increase in our revenues. From an expenditure perspective, it breaks down again in fairly large categories. First, it should be noted that 25% of the $3.6 million in additional revenues was allocated to a series of non-departmental fixed costs, three largest non-departmental fixed costs, that being health insurance, the retirement assessment, and debt service. So those three categories consume 25% of the additional revenue we generate or assume to generate in fiscal 2017. That's not uncommon. The retirement assessment went up a little over 8%. I would expect it would continue to go up at around 8% for the next decade. Given the general schizophrenic nature of the market today, and yesterday and last week and how long into the future, the assumption within the retirement assessment is that their return on investment will be approximately 8% annually. If they're not able to achieve that standard, then you'd see an increase in the amount of the retirement assessment moving forward. But at this point, I would expect that you'll certainly see at least an 8% increase in the retirement assessment each year over the next decade. We expect debt service to increase. Debt service is the way that we're funding a lot of our capital projects, certainly funding our facility master plan. It's still manageable. We're still well below the percentages we established for ourselves, but you should expect to see a regular increase of a couple $100,000 a year in debt service. This is not the debt service which funded the purchase of Osgood Hill or the BU Conference Center or the debt service associated with the high school project. That's overridden debt, and that is coming off the books in 18, 19, and 2025, in which we'll see a dollar for dollar decrease to the tax rate because, again, that's additional dollars come in that go away when we've paid off that particular debt. This really is debt service associated largely to our capital plan. As it relates to health insurance, the good news on that is several years ago, with your leadership, we were able to change into the Group Insurance Commission. We saved several $1 million. We made the conscious decision at the time not to pump those several $1 million immediately back into the budget because we knew once they went away, they were gone. And so we made a conscious decision to sort of incrementally spend the benefit of that health insurance change. An example of how that has benefited us, this year the recommendation is that health insurance rates will increase, or the appropriation will increase by approximately 3.8%. We're actually projecting that health insurance rates will increase by 7%. The actual rates will come out on March 2nd when the GIC meets to vote those rates. We're filling that gap with the flexibility we have in the health insurance appropriation. So in essence, in this year, we're subsidizing over $300,000 of our health insurance costs because we've been flexible in terms of how we've appropriated health insurance funding. And so it gives you an example that if we had spent it all in that 1 year, added several $1 million to the budget, so it would have felt great, and then each and every year we would have had a hard time sort of meeting that goal. So this is another good example of how our fiscal planning and our strategy around sustainability is manifesting itself in a lot of positive ways. So those three categories take up about 25% of the additional spending capacity in fiscal 2017. Beyond that, the larger budget increments, on average, the budget memo that went out indicated that departments should build their budgets not to exceed a 3.7% increase. It's important to note that although we largely expect that larger departments would see the 3.7% increase, it's not expected that you start at 3.7, that there are certainly departments where they can move along, actually add service, or certainly maintain the existing service and be below the 3.7%. It really depends on the nature of the departments. So an example, of town manager, Selectmen's office, we didn't go up by 3.7%. We're all still here. I'm still going to pay you guys next year. You're still going to pay me. It's all going to work out, but we didn't go up to 3.7%. In cases like the town clerk's office, there's one additional election in fiscal 17, so her budget far exceeded the 3.7%. What you really need to look at is that sort of core of the bigger departments. I refer to those certainly as the school department, police department, and fire department specifically. Those will almost always go up to the full capacity of the recommended budget increase because they're larger departments. They have a lot more salary-driven initiatives, and therefore when salaries change, it has a greater impact on that. So you'll find that the school budget came in at the 3.7 as anticipated. You'll find the same actually for the library this year, which includes an embedded librarian that'll add a total of 0.8 FTEs to the library. Should be noted that the library has had more staff increase on an FTE basis, both as a percentage and in raw numbers, than any department on the municipal side, reflecting a sort of a focus on the library to make sure we return its status to where it was in 01 and 02. And the library, again, this year will include the embedded librarian and some additional FTEs, and that the embedded librarian is the position being funded also on the school side, so that we'll add this sort of shared position, one of the creative initiatives first that Jennifer identified, and we've been able to make a reality moving forward. So again, the larger departments, library, police, fire, schools at 3.7%. Some anomalies like the clerk's office. Another anomaly in the other direction is you'll see the town accountant's budget actually declined. It declined because we moved the payroll person from the town accountant on the municipal side. She's currently downstairs in the office here working through some current payroll issues, and she has been moved into a central support role in payroll, now servicing both the municipal side and the school side, something that I know this board first identified a decade ago, and something that it's taken us a while to accomplish. But I can tell you, not many communities have single source payroll where the payroll officer is handling the payroll for both school and municipal. It sounds like it's common sense. Of course, it's common sense. That's probably why it doesn't happen that often.
Right.
And in our case, really with the strategic partnership with the school, their open-mindedness to do things the right way as opposed to just do things the old way has allowed us to do that with both the payroll and accounts payable office. So you see the unusual case in that case where the town accountant's budget goes down, right? Because that staff is moving in to support our shared services. On the shared services side, we have seen a fairly significant increase year over year, attributable to a couple of things. One is that we're moving payroll into the shared services category. We're moving accounts payable in that direction. We're also taking in and making the IT department truly centralized IT. We had one staff member being funded out of the school budget, now being properly funded out of the IT budget. And we've seen about a $40,000 additional expenditure in the area of capital. We need some additional storage. I will get the technology names wrong, but we need more storage capacity within our service. Chris McClure has made a thoughtful and sound recommendation on how best to proceed with that. We feel it's worth increasing the capital spending within that department this year to sort of catch up in an area that we feel like we have some deficiency. And so that's why the shared services category is up, again, beyond the 3.7%. But overall, the shared services is doing what it's supposed to. It's a shared service. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the additional initiatives. Some of the changes, we talked briefly about the fact that we now view community and economic development as the director and his immediate staff. The planning department now 2 staff and an administrative staff, like the health department and like the conservation department. We are moving forward with a town master planning process, something that has not been completed here since the year 2000. Really, it was a 1998 plan and updated 2 years later with some minor updates. That will take 18 to 30 months to complete. It's not a passive process. It's a very engagement-related process. It'll cost approximately $125,000 to $150,000, depending on the consultant we hire. We've funded 100 of that within the community development budget this year. We'll start that process. I think the work being done by the committee on the Osgood overlay will be a component of that larger project, and it's an important, it's really a centerpiece initiative for the town as we look at what we're going to be over the next decade or 2 decades, and it's something that certainly is a long time coming. We've talked about the consolidation on the payroll, the library position, and the accounts payable. I'd also like to identify that we're going through what's called a recodification process on both our zoning bylaw and our general bylaw. For those folks who are on regularly onto our bylaw, onto our website and look at the bylaws, you see there's not a great continuity in terms of numbering. The zoning isn't so bad, but Dick probably would recognize some of the nuances, but it seems a little clear in some ways. But although I've never gotten the zoning numbering system, there's too many decimal points and too many numbers. But on the general bylaw side, you bounce from Article 1 to Article 88 to Article 149.
I was looking at that the other day, and I was really confused.
It's confusing, right?
So that's just a housekeeping measure, but an important one.
Yeah.
Folks understand.
Yep. It's what's called the recodification. So a company will come in that has an expertise in that. They'll look at the bylaw. They'll renumber them in sequence. They'll properly reference when the modifications were made going back through. We haven't done this in 30 years. They'll go back and reference the proper modification dates. They'll give you sort of an historical perspective, so there'll be footnotes to when each of those bylaws were amended. You'll get an electronic version to be posted onto the town's website, so we get something that people can see from an electronic format that's better than what we have today, and really will allow folks to start at the beginning of the bylaw and get to the end, and recognizing some continuity and some fluidity to a process. So that's called a recodification. We've included it in Joyce Bradshaw's budget. It's typically done out of the clerk's office. And we're doing the same kind of process as one of the initial steps on the master plan to clean up the zoning bylaw. Again, this doesn't mean changing zoning. It means cleaning it up so it can be sequentially read and logically read. And then as part of the master planning process, we'll take that recodified product and start to make some updates to it. And so those are pretty important, significant initiatives.
I was just going to say, I think of those are, in particular, when you're looking towards the future for the community, simplifying this and laying it out this way is so important and so long overdue, and I'm really happy about that.
I think we've all recognized it as we've changed in communication methods with our residents, that we do a lot more electronic communication, a lot more interaction in ways we just historically didn't. I would guess, although I haven't done, maybe we'll get a count on Larry in the office, I generally think we see generally less foot traffic than probably 4 or 5 years ago, and probably a tremendous amount less than 10 years ago. People are doing business in different fashion. It's our obligation to change how we do business so that we can communicate properly and provide this level of service that people would expect. This kind of simple change, if someone went onto the bylaw today, I would tell you a casual reader could not casually read the document.
Now, I think some of our local developers and such have a difficult time following it as well. And I think it often contributes possibly to inconsistencies even among the boards.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
So
Had that problem.
if you
Right.
add that to the software change that we've made in terms of having a unified software, general ledger software product, something that we started 3 years ago, throwing out a system that was effective, reasonably effective, but really needed some change. We're using multiple different platforms to do our financials, to a unified financial software, one that's commonly used nationally. Then adding on that the permitting software project, we're in the process, as you know, of implementing an online permitting system. It'll first start with the building permits, but eventually get into the conservation and plumbing and electrical. You'll be able to go online as a resident or as a builder-developer and be able to fill out that. You'll have drop-down boxes. The fee will be calculated for you. All that information can happen online. You come in, you'll be able to make a payment if you want online. Come in and get plans approved. So we're finding, and then in that way, residents can see sort of the historical view of what's happened from a permitting perspective. It's all public record. And so we're moving into a more transparent environment as it relates to permitting as well. That's going to take a while. It's not an easy process. You don't just flip a switch. It'll all be based on a master address table. That's been a little complicated for us, quite frankly, but we're working through some of that as well. And one of the last steps, as you see on here, is an initiative this year, is a new computer-aided mass appraisal system. That's the software used by assessing departments to determine values. We've used a sort of homegrown product.
I was going to say, I was Garrett fan about that.
We've used a homegrown product for a bit of time, and we're moving off that. We need a more dynamic product, one, again, that is more user-friendly from the outside, one that allows us to create a master address table that can be used across all of our platforms. And so we're in the process of getting, there are 1 or 2 or 3 major players in that business that most Massachusetts communities use. We'll select one of those vendors, and we'll start a process beginning July 1 to move or migrate into a new system for a mass appraisal. I would note that all of these changes really bring to something we've spoken about in the past. We need aggressive succession planning. And sometimes people get offended by the term succession planning, but we all need to be succession planning.
I agree.
And that includes my office as well. We all need to be able to leave their office and have someone else come in and be able to use the work that's behind us and continue the progress. And to a certain extent, the technology that we're using, both in terms of desktop technology and the software we're using for various aspects of the work in town, they're far more proprietary. And I think the weakness with that is when a person left, the gap was more tremendous. We had a lot more downtime. It didn't.
Learning curve, right? You get it.
Exactly. Yeah. So this really, most of the products, in fact, all of the products we're moving to are products widely used in the industry. So if someone else with a municipal government background comes in, they're familiar with it, they know from day one how to use the product, the training curve goes down, the orientation period shrinks, the loss in productivity declines. And so part of this is really not only for the residents and the business owners, but it's also for us to make us more efficient in the long term as turnover happens.
Well, the easier it is to do business in North Andover, the more people will want to do business in North Andover.
That's the concept.
That's the goal and the concept, I would assume, right?
Assessing,
Yes.
were you talking about that would just be for the assessors, or that would be also for the residents? Because I'm seeing that
Yep.
something has changed.
Yeah.
It's not sequential, like you'll put in Main Street and it'll be 25301,
Right.
then back to 407, so it is a little,
Right.
is that part of?
No, it's not part of the change. So we have not started the process of moving to a new system. There's some interim steps, some interim changes that were made to the existing system that you're seeing that we're working on.
Okay.
But the new system will look very much from a resident perspective. Again, if there are 2 major platforms, I think I know who we're moving forward with, but I don't want to publicly yet announce that. They're used, either one of these companies are used by 100-plus communities. So if you went on 3 or 4 or 5, you're bound to see one or the other, and they're very standard user-friendly platforms. You place in an address like you're used to.
Yeah.
So it won't look too much different than that, except that it cooperates better with our existing software and is a little more robust in terms of our ability to do things. So what you're seeing now is not directly linked to this change.
But that will be,
Yes, that won't look like that, which is currently, I understand, creating some...
it's frustrating.
Yes, it is frustrating. I've noticed the changes as well. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
not to this particular change.
Okay.
We have agreed, and we will find a way to coordinate the accounting processes so that dollars over a certain dollar value in our Medicaid reimbursement account with the schools will go specifically directed for curriculum. The superintendent has rolled out that plan. We've got to work through some of the nuances of how to manage these kinds of initiatives within the municipal accounting municipal accounting environment. I would say it's not something I'm aware that other communities are doing, but being able to dedicate dollars specifically to curriculum and fund those on an annual basis, I think makes parents feel, I can't speak to the families here, but it sounds to me, or I've been convinced that it makes the parents feel comfortable that every year there's a dedicated amount to curriculum, and it creates that sort of continuity so that within the particular schools they can start building a plan for sort of a unified curriculum, something that I think most folks would recognize is important and I think helpful moving forward. We're going to begin the process of upgrading our streetlights to LED. As you know, we purchased a streetlight several years ago. I promised a 2.9-year payback on those streetlights. We met that 2.9 years. We save on a regular basis $30,000 to $40,000. On an annual basis on a streetlight cost from where we did before we purchased the streetlights. We're now using that savings to purchase LED streetlights. So we'll slowly start to go through the process of replacing the existing streetlights with LED lights, which have a longer shelf life, require less maintenance, and therefore in the long time, and also less energy costs, creating more savings. So we're using the savings created by one initiative to make an additional improvement, something I think has been sort of a hallmark of how we've proceeded. Instead of using those savings and hiring a person, we're using those savings to create additional savings. And that's an initiative that will start beginning next year. And then there's some other initiatives we're looking to try to ramp up that process more aggressively. You will notice in the budget that the funding for legal counsel is still, last year was, I think, 152, this year 165. That number is pretty consistent with how it's been the last 4 or 5 years. I'm suggesting that fall in 2 categories. Yeah. One is an in-house counsel, and one is specialized counsel for land use and those kind of things that you would need specialized counsel for. The aggregate counsel expenditure has not changed. I think, again, there's a slight uptick this year, but generally not changed. Part of that uptick is associated with the fact that we're going to start the ascertainment process on the new cable license, and so we need legal counsel associated with, over the next 3 years, of renewing the Verizon license moving forward, and there's a cost associated with that, so that's part of the cost that are factored into that budget. Finally, something that the financial reserve policies called for, and something that is significant, although the dollar value doesn't seem it, is we've included in the operating budget a $50,000 expenditure to fund the other post-employment benefits trust fund. So we're now incorporating into our operating budget, setting aside dollars to start to offset the OPEB liability. That's the liability that we set aside $500,000 last year to go to the state to be invested, and set aside $1 million the year before in a stabilization fund. I think we're developing the trust to be able to move the money out of that stabilization fund eventually into the OPEB trust. It is our goal, agreed upon goal, something that's in our budget policy statement and has been mentioned often, to bring this community to a AAA rating. North Andover has never been a AAA rated community in its history. We are AA+ and on the doorstep of doing all the things necessary for major national bond rating agencies to recognize us as being in that category of communities that is as financially strong as a community can be. And things like the OPEB reserve and those kinds of initiatives and managing costs like health insurance are the kinds of things that they look for. They've indicated to us that we're there, but they need proof we're going to stay there. And so these kinds of initiatives show that proof. So this minor $50,000 initiative really means a lot, because it's the next logical step in us providing that sustainability moving forward.
Just for a point of reference, how many towns do you estimate, cities and towns in the state of Massachusetts, would be at that AAA rating, just for point of reference?
Yeah, I'd have to look. I would say, I'm just guessing, 10, 12%.
10, okay, so it's low.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
That's very good.
I mean, I'm picking a number.
Yep.
But for us, it really puts us in that kind of position. Nationally, it might be the same kind of number, and I'm really I'm guessing.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But to be in that upper tier, to be recognized, to be producing a budget document that's consistent with the highest standard acceptable within municipal finance, to be in that category of a AAA rated community. We've gone up one bond rating. We've gone up in terms of the outlook of the community from stable to positive. We're taking the right steps. Your leadership and the support of the community has been great to understand the importance to that. We haven't got greedy about the good times. We've marched along at a steady pace. I know we still have opportunity for more. There are opportunities to do more in this community and meet the needs of our residents moving forward. But I very much appreciate that we've found a way to do that says that incrementalism is okay, that muddling along sometimes is okay, that as long as we continue to improve, that improvement doesn't have to be so notable as to derail the process of moving forward in the upcoming years. So I think we're well positioned. The budget represents all of our interests and is consistent with the budget policy statement. So I certainly would recommend we move it forward, and would like to see if the superintendent would have an opportunity to make some comments if she'd like.
We can't wait.
Since she's here.
You know, she got you a shawl.
Yeah, she got you a shawl.
Could be a,
Very water and trying to be
Really?
very welcoming into our space. Yeah. So, Mr. Mailer, I just want to thank you for all your teaching over the last few months. I talked about that with the school committee, is, learning North Andover. Andrew, you've done an excellent job teaching me, mentoring me, helping me understand town finance. I still don't understand it completely, but I have to say I'm getting closer. And I just want to say that there's a few things in this budget, I think, that represent the beginning of what I believe is going to be a wonderful partnership. And I don't just see this as the first step. I think, for instance, the Medicaid fund, I want to talk a little bit about that. One of the challenges is when a school district goes through harder times, one of the first things a superintendent is going to do is to take money out of curriculum because it's not getting rid of people. And the challenge is, because we've done that over time, we haven't had dedicated money at the central office level for almost a decade for curriculum resources. And as a result, we have a situation in our schools that's been widely documented, many people talked about, is we have very different curriculum initiatives going on across the elementary schools. And as Jimmy Marini would say, a North Andover education should be a North Andover education. And so one of the things we need to do is start to rebuild a consistent experience across our elementary schools, for example. And so the idea of having a curriculum fund that basically is protected from people like me for many years to come, to ensure that we have funds, to ensure that we have curricular resources for our kids. If it's held by the town, I can't move it to personnel or future me's. So I think that's just a wonderful model for a community, and I just really appreciate your creativity in trying to think about that. And then the other thing is this concept of the embedded librarian. I've really enjoyed working with the Stevens Memorial Library and thinking of how we can better collaborate. As you may know, currently we have one librarian across 5 elementary schools, which is just sort of crazy. In terms of one day in each library, in each school. It just doesn't create any consistency for kids. It doesn't create any consistency for teachers. So the concept is to do 2 things. One is to have 2.5 librarians across 5 elementary schools, which means that each librarian would only go to 2 schools, so half time at each one. And obviously that would be 2, and then the third person would go half to Stevens and half to one of our schools. So it creates a really nice relationship. It also starts to have things like, well, what if one of the libraries in one of our schools doesn't have a book, but Stevens does? Can we think about inter-school library loan? And once we have people working together, I think that will be wonderful. The other component of the change is actually rebranding the librarian position to a library media specialist position, because the reality of libraries now is they're not what you and I remember as libraries. They're not stacks. It's really an opportunity for connection to information, which is both in harder form like a book, but also digitally. So how do we have our librarians really kind of be the library media specialists and support teachers to use technology in their classrooms? One of the other initiatives that's in our budget is to really get classroom technology where it should be. I just sent a letter actually to all the parents in the North Andover Public Schools today. we are not at a place where we should be in terms of technology in the classrooms. I see basic technology as a projector, some way to project the teacher's computer, a way for a document camera, which is like a souped up overhead, so getting rid of those acetates that we all remember in school, and you can just put a document up, and then a way for the teacher's computer to connect to all of that. That really is basic technology. And we're going to work really hard to get that technology in, but if we don't have the people to support the teachers to know how to use that technology, they're not going to use it. So that's the idea of rebranding the librarians. So I think we've come up with some creative solutions and creative ideas, and as we continue to think about shared services, the payroll situation, the accounts payable, it's been really nice that the payroll person has actually been in our offices now because of the change of where town hall is. So it's not even just kind of the concept of collaboration, we're like living collaboration. Yes. Right? I mean, it's, and, moving between our offices and understanding that. And I think the other thing that I would say is not only are we being thoughtful about that, but we're finding efficiencies. We have been duplicating work. So, somebody would do it over here and then send it down to town hall and everybody would double check. And now if we just work together, we're actually being much more efficient. So, A, thank you. And B, I'm really excited about this budget and I appreciate your support for it.
One more piece of the librarian. It's interesting on the Stevens side, that librarian will fill into the children's room. So
right.
It's a logical connection. It's not a librarian doing something that's, say, in reference. There'll be a connection. So some young person could end up in a school and see that particular librarian, right, and then go to the library and see that librarian and create the connection, I think, that the library and the schools would recognize in the long term is good for the viability of both, right? That connection
Absolutely.
Between both. So it's, again, not just a way of sort of creatively saying, hey, we're funding a position from two different budgets. It's a way of truly linking the relationship between traditionally municipal department, like schools, and, like the library, and the school department. So that was a Jen idea and something that has made perfect sense. And
it's
so
a great idea for,
made perfectly logical
for folks
sense.
at home that they don't realize so many of our children leave school and all walk down to the library.
Right. And now they'll have a familiar face, which is really nice. Or more familiar faces.
They've been doing that for I see it right out my front window is the library, but great numbers of kids are going down, and that's a great idea. It really ties.
Well, it wasn't just me. Kathleen Keenan worked with me on it. It was a nice partnership.
Are there many other school districts that have that type of relationship with municipal library services?
So she first heard of this in Worcester, where actually they pulled funding for the libraries, and this is how the libraries kind of helped support the schools. So it was more of a kind of difficult times, but as we started to talk about it, we just said, why couldn't we do this? And so I don't know if a lot of others have done this out of kind of a move forward rather than, oh my gosh, we have to have some support.
Right. It's a great resource, and I'm glad the schools recognize that and that we could work together on it.
Right, and I would just tell you that this is one piece of our collaboration. We are working on a one author, one community next fall, where we would all read a book from the same author, and then actually bring that author to the schools and to the community for a day. Okay. That will be announced. I don't want to get too far out ahead of that. I'm thinking about this summer. I am currently doing a superintendent snow day challenge when it snows, and we did a whole bunch of pillowcases for troops in Afghanistan on Monday. And so the idea is actually maybe to do a superintendent summer challenge to build little libraries all over the town. I don't know if you know about little libraries, but it's where people put little library boxes out in front of their house, and then people become like exchange libraries, and that we would coordinate with Stephen. So this is just one piece of that collaboration, a critical piece, but we are talking about how we can collaborate because it just makes so much sense.
I think one major difference from what I'm experiencing, to the question of where this came up, is that we all experienced the need to be creative when things were really tough. I think what's really great about what's happening here is we're being creative when, not that we don't need to, but we're at a time when we could live with the economy being slightly better. We're still thinking of ways to try to do things in a more creative way and a more effective way. And I can tell you that that's not common. Usually it's around, oh my God, we don't have any money. How do we get creative? Right?
No, I think we're capitalizing on the good times.
Yeah. Which is really the best time to do it.
And I think that kudos goes to, there was a time, unfortunately, when it was very us versus them, and over the last, I'd say decade or even less, the collaboration between, we're one town, and we've really recognized that we are one town, and that by bringing, it's not the schools versus municipal or town and schools, it's not that. We're North Andover. And for me, having a child in the school system and being on this side of the table, I'm personally very grateful, and I think two of the best things that happen to this community are our town manager and Dr. Price, and I think that through your leadership, other committees and folks and people see that we're one town, and this is one of the best budgets I've seen in my tenure on this board, and I applaud both of you for the thought that went into this.
Well, I clearly could not have done it without Andrew. I want to tell you, a lot of creativity in him.
Yes, there is.
Andrew, I have
Yes,
this problem.
there is.
Well, let me think about it.
Yeah.
That's what I love.
Exactly.
That's what I love.
And 2 minutes
Give me a couple
later,
minutes.
they'll
I'll come
No,
back.
he normally takes about a week, but
What I'd like to say about this budget is, it's a budget with a kind of a small increase, right? And it would be easy to sit there and have a small increase like that and either reduce services or not move the town forward. But within that increase, we've also been able to, and you've listed some significant accomplishments here in your statement of some of and one of them being this building we're sitting in. So not only have we kept the increases low, but we've also been able to provide continued services, increasing in services and buildings, and continuing to provide buildings with the fire station. I mean, I don't have to list them all, the town hall project that's going on in this building, the school gymnasium. So, I mean, it's just amazing. So it's really hard to question or to come up with any questions for this budget because, again, it's a minimal increase in the budget. And
with maximum impact.
With maximum people. And yes, we do see an increase in our taxes, but we also see that it's going to places. We don't say that it's just, where's the money going? We can drive around this town and we can see these improvements and we can see level services, and I shouldn't say level, increased services and bringing some features back that we haven't seen in decades. So, kudos to this. And
But
it's
what
really,
I love about the budget is you've got these like fail-safe, like the special ed budget. Something goes wrong, we don't all go, oh my gosh, where are we going to find them? There's so many of those that you have built into this budget that is just such great planning, things that we've talked about for years, but they're there. And I'll tell you, had to deal with these before something goes wrong, and we're, calling the department saying, can you turn some money in? And, I mean, really, but to see that it's there, so that we have a child that comes to the community that's very involved, that is quite costly, and it just doesn't put it.
Those crises also created that pull between us versus them type of where's it going to come from, who's going to suffer. By building this in, we're still collaborating. We're still in this together.
I could take you all back to the 90s.
No, that's my point. We're not there.
We'd appreciate this.
Moving forward.
Don Stewart time capsule.
I got more sleep in these meetings. I used to never get sleep before. I get lost.
Those weren't the prettiest of times.
There was a lot of now we get the
Enjoy it while it's here, guys. Trust me.
I think, though,
well, it's true.
it's great
That's
because
true. We need to understand that, too. Enjoy it while it's here. We need to be prudent for the future, which I think
Capitalize
that's also
on the
occurring.
good times.
That's also occurring in here. We've got, funds that are being set aside for those times when things aren't so good.
Well, that's the thing. Capitalize on the good times and continue looking towards the future. There may be bad times, but exactly, we've built in, I don't want to say stopgaps because one never knows what the future will bring us, but at least
Soft landings.
soft landings.
But something?
There we go.
One thing that North Andover has done through all of this, from bad times to good times, and Andrew, you talked about it, is we've learned to try to ferret out 10,000 here, 5,000 there. We don't just say, oh, well, we would dig in and pile it together and make something good out of it versus just letting it go. And Andrew, you've done a great job at continuing with our Yankee frugal ways of the past, and it's...
He's working on my bronze statue, too, by the way.
Yeah. Very lucky to have you both.
You're not resting on your laurels. You could be using this opportunity right now in a non-productive way where you both just stick with your separate departments and just do things because they're working. Instead, you're proactively, again, getting together. So I have to ask, are there any teasers as far as what can we expect next year? Are there things that we can look forward to? I mean, it sounds like you're getting
we got to get one voted on. Don't worry.
I would say that...
Any teasers?
Any teasers. So before Jen adds teasers that I have to write down and figure out, I would generally say that what's really great is that from a budget process, the stuff you don't see, the sort of sausage making internally. One is that we're really fortunate. There's another person downstairs trying to work through a payroll person, and that's your finance director. The amount of skin in the game, the amount of investment she makes in time and energy to get this stuff done. She's not the front of the shop person. She'd prefer not being that person, but in terms of commitment and energy and making this come to light, there's nothing better for a person in my role, having been in that finance role once, and to be able to walk into someone's office and say, after Jen has posed a question, can we do this? And have someone that you can have a sincere and honest conversation with, who will tell you what you can and can't do within parameters, work within the parameters you're trying to get to. And so Lynn, because she is who she is, isn't front and center as often as we would like, but she really is in many ways the sort of architect.
And I think we don't forget Jim Maley as well.
Same way. Yep. Jim's a pragmatist. We always like pragmatists when we get there, and provides the sounding board. So I would say in that context, there's not a time in any of these budget processes during my time, and certainly during Jen's time, because she brings a lot of this to the table. Every year there's new things. We should never present the budget which doesn't in some way change who we were last year.
Right.
It's just not, it should never be acceptable. Even if the money were the same, we should never stay in the status quo. There's just too many things that any business, and certainly municipal government, can do better every day. I noticed this in Jen. She looks at the way we do things. She looks at effective shops and says, yeah, that's pretty good, but... Right? There's always that sort of butt hanging at the end. And I think it's one of the things the municipal side does as well. So what we ask of you, right, as people in elected roles, the same as the school committees, always ask what new things we're doing every year. Because if I present a budget that doesn't have these things and it's balanced, it's not enough. We need to continue to try to find ways to improve who we are. We're not perfect. There are things we need to address. The good news is we communicate about those things and try to find ways. So you should always be expecting of us that we'll be finding different ways to do things and pushing the envelope a little bit, because it's the only ways you get better. It's the only way that we improve as a community, and it's important. Now, what's the list again, Jen?
No, don't worry.
Let's just check.
I know better. So the thing I would say is, in my budget, there is one thing that I think deserves, Andrew, again, has really showed me about this kind of methodical planning over time. There is a part of the budget that I proposed to the school committee that they adopted where we actually funded 2 elementary school positions that we are actually not going to hire next year because we don't have the classroom space for those additional. I have been very clear that I am concerned about the class sizes at especially our elementary and middle school. And so I have put in 2 positions that we will not fund, and we will use that money for one-time expenses, specifically curricular materials, so that we can allow the Medicaid money to build up, and then also classroom furniture, which we have not purchased in decades on a consistent basis.
The middle school furniture was 15 to 20.
Yeah.
Right?
So, but what I'm doing that is I'm putting in additional classroom, elementary school classroom, because part of the work that we have already committed to is to developing additional elementary school classrooms over time. And my concern is that if we go and build these new spaces, we won't have the teachers to put in them. So one of the things that I'm doing right now is funding 2 positions for next year's budget, which would then, for the following year, another 2 positions. If we get 6 additional classrooms, when they open, I'll have the staff to put them in it. So, one of the things that we're doing is the teasers are more like we're thinking over time and how to get there, because it would not be smart for us to have 6 additional classrooms that were empty because we didn't have the teachers to put in them. So I know, and Andrew knows, that one of the things I'm concerned about is class size. So that's not going to all change in one year, in one fiscal cycle. So the idea here is to over time build the capacity that when we get those classrooms, we will be able to staff them.
And in the meantime, you're benefiting in tangible ways throughout
Right.
the schools.
With one-time expenses that we,
Fantastic.
in more challenging times, have not been able to fund. I mean, when
Right.
you're in challenging times, all right, that desk worked this year, it can work next year. So trying to really find those ways, and things like, I know we said, the desk, but when you part putting there, it creates a better image of your
Oh, of
school,
course
it
it does.
increases teacher morale, it's things like that, and again, with those one-time expenses, I don't have to fund them the following year, so when the teachers are there. So that's part of what we're doing, is trying to plan over time so that it's not like all of a sudden we got 6 new classrooms and that just came out of the air. Because we know that that's not the North Andover way.
No, it's not the North Andover way, and it's that progressive forward thinking and the creative thinking that we see from the both of you, as well as all the other committees and what
Absolutely.
have you in town, because you need all their support. But the two leaders in the community that are such forward thinkers, we're all benefiting from. All benefiting from. It's just
to
awesome.
round this off so we, as is typical with even sports teams, right, the coaches get too much credit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We get too much blame, too. No, but too much credit. One of the things that happens here is Jen's recommendation was something I hadn't heard of from a school official, quite frankly, in 20-something years. But that decision then has to be evaluated by a school committee.
Oh,
And for
absolutely.
a school committee to agree to use dollars to, in essence, set aside dollars in a budget to use them next year, I sat in the room waiting to see what the school committee was going to say. And so, in fairness, and not unlike this group that sort of thinks past those things, for a school committee to say this makes sense, and if we recognize we could do something today and it would be really great and we could look good, but what's better is what we do tomorrow.
For the future.
It's always about the future.
Kudos, very impressive. Yep, kudos.
They're a good committee, great committee. We're with good, again, working together and with the superintendent, not against you, it's that forward thinking that it's just, I feel like we're in such a great place this year. It makes me smile.
So if I can wrap up just with the enterprise fund. So water and sewer, thank you very much, Jen. The water and sewer funds continue to do what we set them on the course to do.
Good.
Again, in the book I will never write, but maybe I'll just keep on promising to write a book. What we talked about close to,
You're gonna
4,
use real
5.
names?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. I'll write the book. It'll be gross written, right?
That'll be our first community book.
Book was the fact that we sat in a really interesting spot 4+ years ago on the enterprise funds. Every single year the rates went up, or they went down and they went up. We didn't know what the reserves were. We didn't know what we were doing from a capital perspective. And in my opinion, the debt service was in places that I hadn't seen before. Today in these particular budgets, you have water and sewer budgets that I'm presenting, which are consistent with how they've been for the last several years. The reserves are more than solid. We're reinvesting those reserves to offset capital purchases to both decrease the debt service and level fund rates. If these budgets are passed for the 5th year in a row, I'm not going to recommend rate increases for water and sewer fund. 5 years in a row. There wasn't 2 years during the previous 30 where that was the case. Now, we're getting closer to those pressure days, and I certainly will tell you that on the sewer side, especially as some of the work begins at the GLSD and they incur their own debt service, we're seeing some increase. But certainly in fiscal 17, if we proceed, the reserves are robust. We're paying for our capital. If you notice in both of those budgets, the overall budget in water is down year over year by nearly $400,000, almost all attributable to managing debt service from levels that were 40% of the bottom line to 25% of the bottom line. On the sewer, a slight increase, so we're absorbing a $250,000 increase in the GLSD assessment by showing decreased debt service. There's a way of offsetting those to manage rates. And again, this year we'll have something in the warrant to take a portion of the retained earnings, pay for capital purchases, so we don't have to raise rates again. So those continue to move along in a way that, quite frankly, we're not seeing in the region. Every year that certainly neighboring communities are going up in water and sewer. We're not showing that, and things are functioning well. I give credit to Bruce Thibodeau for living within the parameters of what I give him, and doing so in a way that we continue to move forward progress. Finally, the Stevens Estate is doing what it has never done. It's investing in itself. There's a request this year within their budget that they take $125,000 of their retained earnings and reinvest it back into the state for capital purchases to further perpetuate or further propel revenue streams in the function side of their business. So they went from having negative retained earnings for the period of a decade to seeing the first positive retained earnings 4 years ago. Those have steadily increased. We're now using those and reinvesting them back into the facility. You'll see $125,000 in their budget funded by their own retained earnings for the purpose of investing in the estate. So it's a good sign. I've raised the warning sign on the Stevens Estate that I don't know in the long term about our ability to manage buildings like the carriage house. It's an expensive proposition. I don't know what we want to do with it. But certainly, we should be proud of the management up there and the leadership of the trustees and the board.
Absolutely,
and making
yeah.
sure that function for the facility continues to operate in a positive way for the community. That's all I got.
Your turn, Stan.
All right.
Thank you.
We need a,
Thanks for all this and the work you've done.
Appreciate it.
This was a great perspective.
excellent. Do I have a motion to accept the town managers?
Madam Chair, move that the Board of Selectmen approve the town manager's FY17 recommended budget.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Appreciate it. We will forward it to the Finance Committee tomorrow morning. I'll be at the Finance Committee tomorrow night as the first of 6 or 8 or some number of meetings to get us to town meeting.
Okay, great. Okay, any public comment?
Let's go, Stan. Sure.
Sure, Stan. Come on up, don't disappoint. But make it quick. No, I'm just kidding.
Super Judge, I will make it quick. Just some comments on Mr. Mailer's presentation. I think the thing for me as a school committee person that's really been a dramatic change has in fact been Mr. Mailer's approach to what we've been doing here in terms of budgeting. It's gotten better and better every single year. And I think the thing that's really made this all possible has been sort of a level of trust that he's been able to engender for all of us. And has gotten us out of that mode of, let's call it budget poker, right? You make an offer, I'll make an offer, and then we'll fight for a couple of months until we get the best offer. I would have to say we've gotten better deals from him straight than we ever got before, double in most cases. So who's to argue with that? The other thing is that I would say that based on the trust that he's been able to sort of engender for all of us, that's made things like the consolidation of accounts payable possible. You know, we've talked about that for a while, and we were 4, 5, 6 years ago, we were a little hesitant about that. We're like, well, I don't know, that might be a good idea. Now it seems like a perfectly good idea and well worth supporting on our side. So it's been great. Now, I would say that if our budgets reflect our priorities, good priorities, we're doing really well in that respect. And I think both on the school side and on the town side, it really shows us in a very positive light. I think we, as a town, right now are extremely blessed to have two leaders, our town manager and our new superintendent, that are really, I think, helping us move into a whole new era. I think of this as the golden age of North Andover. I think this is going to work out really great. So thank you very much for everything you do.
My pleasure.
Oh, and I would just remind you, she's only been here 7 months and what, 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
I know.
That's true.
We've come a long ways.
Yes, we have.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
Stan.
Motion adjourned.
No, I have one more item.
No, we have one more
I
item.
got a note.
Not that easy, not that easy. Come on.
I got an Ask the Manager question. I'm going to do a forensic analysis to determine who wrote this. It might be Bill Gordon. So I was asked about the status of the electrical aggregation that we've spoken about at the last meeting. Someone's interested in that and wanted to find out where we are as the board, but a reminder to the public, we're moving forward with a town meeting article with the support of the Board of Selectmen to begin the aggregation process.
Yes.
We do have a consultant who was part of the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission RFP process, so we have a consultant on board already. I think they were at the meeting that we talked about this. If town meeting approves the electrical aggregation process, we go to Department of, whatever the state department's now called, Department of Environmental, whatever, DOER, I think is what they are today. And we talk with them, and we build an aggregation plan with the help of that consultant. We come back, we show you that plan, we make sure you're okay with that plan, the board has to vote on that. And then we proceed with issuing a bid to make sure that we can select a company who could provide an alternative way for residents to procure their electric energy at a lower cost rate than the current provider. So it does take a little bit of time. Town meeting is really the first critical step. But I wanted the public to know, based on my note, I do have an estimated, it came in an envelope, said estimated.
Did it?
Yeah, it's great. I feel like that guy that was on Channel 38, when Channel 38 was around. Who was that?
He said he won't know who wrote it.
It's Bill Good. I did want to note that the board is supportive, and we are moving in that direction. It'll take a bit. It'll probably take close to a year before it happens, but we're moving in that direction. I want the residents to be aware of it. That's all I have. Oh, and I did include the current opiate reports. The board is, I told you I'm going to give you those reports on a monthly basis, and I have given you a report produced by Chris McClure about what's happening with our own homegrown report-it system, something that we didn't even put in our accomplishments. We're getting regular interaction on our own app. People are asking questions.
It's getting good reviews.
Reviews, the residents are happy with it. So I'll start to give you that on a regular basis.
The opiate overdose report from the fire department was an interesting read. And I believe your committee...
I think a lot of credit is owed to Jeff Deshane.
Yeah, he's done a great job.
Jeff gets all of this information together. He's been working with the hospitals. He's been working with the fire department as a whole, other public safety officials. I want to commend him, because a lot of what we would need to paint that picture of what's happening in our town wouldn't be possible were it not for this data. So Jeff actually was with us just 2 weeks ago. So we had a preliminary meeting of the opioid abuse task force, and Jeff really helped direct us, I think, in a positive way. So we've been really fortunate. We had a 2-hour-plus discussion at the police department, 15 of us. Due to the hard work of Selectman Valancourt, we actually have a public health student from UMass Lowell interning with the committee, and kept very thorough notes to the point that actually she got together with Stan Limpert and I. We actually got kicked out of a restaurant. We were there that long, going over. We got kicked out. Can you believe it? Kicked out.
Oh, I can believe it.
No.
I can believe it.
Stan tipped 8%. I think that was the deal.
Shame.
No, but just from that preliminary meeting, we came up with 55 different areas that we were hoping to dig into, and so it's really just been trying to organize that before we start farming it out. So exciting, slower, but exciting. I think we all wish that we could snap and it could happen like this.
I think we often wish we could snap our fingers and a lot could happen just like this, but sometimes, as Andrew used earlier, it has to go through the sausage grinder for the final product to be the best we can deliver. Great. Any other...
I snap my fingers out.
Bring it on, Donnie.
Move adjourned.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Happy Valentine's Day.